Hey family, happy Easter. Today we're going to talk about something very important to the African American community, and that is why African Americans get married at a lower rate and why we have a higher divorce rate than our white counterparts. Um, Marriage is a very important institution because of the fact that we use it to build wealth, raise our children, and actually pass that wealth on to the next generation by taking two incomes and turning it into one income and being able to pool resources. So I want to start off with a few facts. So in 1960, 74% of whites were married. By 2008, 56% were married. 1960, 61% of blacks were married. By 2008, 32% were married. So that was a 24% decrease for whites and a 47.5% decrease for blacks. So in the past, there was a debate and a myth that was built from a report by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And the Moynihan report became infamous for pushing this idea that black culture was the reason why African Americans weren't getting married. But since then, we have 40 years of research that disproves his thesis. And this 40 years of research, and especially by Belinda Tucker, which says in her research that African Americans have nothing within their culture that is aversive to marriage. And actually, marriage is more important to African Americans than it is to whites. So as black people, we actually know that. One of the things that people don't know about blacks as one of the hidden secrets is that African Americans are very socially conservative. We are very church going, religion adhering to people. And so we actually tend to side more toward conservatism when it comes to our social lives, and we tend to be more economically liberal, and that is because we've always lacked economically, and so we've seen distributions of wealth as a way of accumulating wealth because of the fact that we've seen how wealth has been transferred out of our community through redlining and other racist practices that kept us from actually participating in the free market. So the number one reason why we see that African Americans have a lower marriage rate than whites, and why marriage is just not a stronger institution as it used to be in the African American communities nowadays, is because of finances. So there has been significant research through economics and social science that shows that high unemployment rates, a low family wealth, familial wealth, low incomes, all are correlated with lower marriage rates. So typically, in our society, which is a capitalistic society, if you don't have the money to take care of a family, you typically don't make one. You don't actually you and if you do have children or anything like that, you have less children. That's what the data shows us. And so a lot of times they'll talk about the single black mother, and they'll throw that out there and say, well, it doesn't make any sense for a woman to be single, or for even a man to be a single black father, because we know that marriage is a vehicle to create wealth. But when you have one income, and it might be the mom working and she's the only one that can get a job, and the dad can't get a job, or the dad's working and the mom can't get a job, what ends up happening is, instead of having you and the child's mouth to feed, now you have you, the child's mouth to feed, and the mother's mouth to feed. And so you just adding more mouths to feed, and not any income to help feed those mouths. So a lot of people see it as more strategic to just have a family unit consisting of the person who's bringing in the bread, and the people, the children who are dependent on the bread, and that's it. And so that's why you have a lot of single parents, and that's why you're not seeing marriages formed, because you have a lack of financial stability. Also, this lack of financial stability brings us to mass incarceration. So a lot of brothers are not on the street to even get married to our women because they've been locked up. And then why are they getting locked up? It's because of economic crimes. So on Wall Street, you could steal billions of dollars and you probably won't even do any time. You'll get fined a few million or something like that, and then we'll bail you out as a public. But if you go and sell, an ounce of weed or something like that, you'll get 10 years, 25 years, 30 years, or whatever. And so what they won't tell you on the propaganda media is that we actually have the same amount or lower rates of crime as whites, yet we are prosecuted more than whites. We get more time than whites, and we're actually over policed for petty crimes than whites, and that's why we're in jail. And so a lack of finances pushes people to do a lot of those things to survive, and those things are what actually are keeping us from getting married. So it's finances that's keeping us from getting married if we're free, and then the finances are getting us sent to prison because we're trying to make quick money to survive. And so we're not there to even be married because we're in jail. Number two, there's a mismatch of the ideal versus the reality in the minds of women. Now, when I first started to do this video, I was thinking about how I often thought being a male that it was men who had these unrealistic ideas about women, and how our perception of what a real woman should be was not the reality, and that we were putting this undue burden on our women. So I'm thinking in my mind, like, we want a porn star, and we want a stripper, and we want a woman with a college degree, and all this stuff in one person. And that's just an impossible task to ask from women. And that may be the case, but it doesn't fold out in the research. What I actually found in the research was that black women actually have one of the highest standards for their men um, than any other group. Um, Another Pew Research study showed that um, black women's criteria for men was one of the highest they have ever seen. So when they asked black women, what kind of men do you want to be married to? What are your standards? They said things like 2/3 of black women said we want a man with a good income. Whites, only 1/3 of whites said they want a man with a good income. 55% wanted a well-educated man. So that's a bachelor's degree or higher, right? Or some type of really high technical skill trade or something like that. 55% of black women said that, while only 28% of whites said so. 50% of black women wanted financial stability before they got married, while only 25% wanted that. 25% of white women wanted that. So you have a huge difference, sometimes almost 100% difference in what whites want for their men and what blacks want for their men. And I can pretty much theorize why that is the case, and that's just because of what we were saying before. When you grow up in poverty, you don't want to add anybody else that's going to keep you in poverty. So even if you have a child out of wedlock, and you want to have that person in your life, you don't want that person living with you not providing. You want a man who is going to have the skills, the capabilities to take care of you and your offspring, which makes sense. Now, as for whites, they might not have to worry about that because they have familial wealth. So they have wealth from generations. So they can go to their parents and say, hey, we're struggling, we're 19-year-olds, we're 20-year-olds, and they can be helped out. I have friends that I work with. They tell me all the time, they say, oh yeah, we got some newlyweds, and they're young and they're still in school and they're gonna have their first kid. They're just not worried about it because they know that dad's gonna come help them with the house. They know their dad on the other side is gonna come, he's gonna give them some money, and it's gonna be all right. So they're able to work things out financially that we wouldn't work out. So that's why our women have such a high standard when it comes to that. Number three, we have women lack an understanding of their power over men. They really do. and they choose bad men often. And so this is something that happens in the black community a little too much, and that's that um, we have we have a lot of women who are looking for something that's not there, right? So I said we have, you're looking for highly educated men. Check. You need to do that. You're looking for people who can keep a job and take care of you. Check. You need to do that. But we also have women who, after all the dust settles, they settle themselves for somebody who doesn't meet any of their standards, because either they realize that it's not realistic, or they just get tired of the search, and so they end up being with people who don't match their criterion. So why is that a problem? So the problem with that is that ends up steering young men into positions and into fields and jobs that they shouldn't be in, just because of the fact that they're going after what the women want. So if all the cheerleaders like the quarterbacks, everybody's gonna want to be the quarterback. Everybody's want to play football. Everyone's want to play basketball. Everybody's want to play whatever you want them to play or do, so that they can be with you. And so I made a little chart and made a distribution based off of the numbers that we have of incarcerated men and all that kind of stuff, about how this shakes out for women. So 60% of women end up not being able to actually find a quality man, so they end up single. So they might have kids, but they'll just end up single. Then you have another 30% of women who will end up settling for a man that's beneath their standard. And then you have another 10% of women who will just get lucky, find a unicorn, and find a man that meets or exceeds their actual expectations for a man. Now, the problem I have with this, the number 3 reasons why we don't get married at the rates of whites and we don't stay married, is because that 30% of women who settle, um, they're settling for somebody who they probably end up going to get a divorce with anyway, because that person is somebody they don't really want um, in the first place. So when you ask them, what do you want? They say, this is what I want, and then they get something that they don't want. So what ends up happening, instead of keeping these high standards and enforcing these high standards and getting those 30% to move into the 10% category of men that meet or exceed your expectations, they settle, and those men have no incentive to get into that category. And so women for a long time have lived in a patriarchal society and have lost their sense of their control over their environment and their surroundings. But women have a substantial amount of power. Legally, they are one of the most protected groups in all of the United States. That's black women and white women. And that's why you'll see when a black man is caught beating on his wife or something like that, he loses all his ability to make a living. So he can't even take care of, if he has a child with you, you can't even take care of the child or you, or even pay you for the damages, because the society basically cuts him off. He becomes dead to the society. And so women have a substantial amount of power that men used to have by using force against women. And that force against women is starting to be deteriorated because of the law and the fact that society is basically killing off people economically who, beat a woman and do these egregious things to women. So now that women have that power, they also have the power to take those 30% of men who are good men, they're just mediocre men, they're not living up to your standards, and get them to move to the 10% category. So that way, there will be 60% of us that'll be dead or locked up, and that is the case, what it is right now. And then through your own actions and who you choose to be with and who you project to society that's important to you, then we can go from this 30% of women settling to having 40% of the women actually finding men that they actually care about and they actually want to be with. And so last, I want to end it with solutions. So the number one solution I have is that we have to improve the living conditions for black men. So that's economics, that's education, that's life expectancy, that's wealth. And we just have to do something for black men. We have never done anything for black men in this country. Black men are being terrorized every day. We're being shot on the streets every day. uh, Black men get no sympathy from our women for what's going on. There are black men who are part of the Black Panther and other black militant groups. They're locked up right now, and nobody's sending them any mail. Nobody cares about these people. Yet we have the freedoms we have today because of these folks. And so that's the thing is that we have forgotten these people. And so black women are actually starting to get gains in the workforce. They're getting gains in and black men are getting none, and we're leaving them behind. And so we need to look for ways to strengthen the black man, and to prop him up through education, economics, life expectancy, and wealth. One person that talks about this is Dr. Boyce Watkins, and I think it's Zaza Ali. They have a great movie that just came out. It's called Democracy, a Black Horror Story. You guys should check it out. The second thing is we have to end mass incarceration. So Obama actually sneakily did a really good job of this, and we saw mass incarceration rates start to severely decline, and no one's talking about it. But this is something that's a pretty bipartisan issue. You have the Republicans who are deficit hogs, and you have the Democrats who care. Those people are starting to come together to work on this issue because they're realizing this is costing us a lot of money and a lot of time, and it's not really productive, and it's kind of making us look like savages. And I mean, it's sad to say that our country can look like savages to other people, but that's exactly what we look like. Other people ask me all the time, like, how can y'all lock up so many people in the country? It's like it's crazy. Like, not like if they're black people and you're locking this many people up, and why is in Africa they're locking this many people up? Why aren't they doing that in Nigeria? Why aren't they doing that in these other places? Why only here? It's ridiculous. So it's something that we have to work on as a black community. Is if we know that we're going to be 2 and 3 and 4 times more likely to get pulled over, whatever, you got to start making the choices that you're not going to have a gun on you, you're not going to have some weed on you, you're not going to even give yourself an opportunity to be a statistic. You have to live like that. And we need more people to think like that, because we think like we're equal and we're like white folks, and the law does not see us as equal. It may never see us as equal. So we have to act exceptional to survive in this game. And so that's one of the things we have to do. And another thing, we have to get militant about this. We have to go and find ways to shut this stuff down. We have to shut down the prison industrial complex. We have to find ways to fund them, get them delisted off of the stock market. We need to get creative about getting militant about these people who want to lock up all of our brothers and sisters. Okay, number 3. We need to choose quality men with character, who are willing to work hard. Nerds, not thugs. So, one of the things that I've noticed is that it starts very early of how we start demarcating who's going to be what and who's going to like who and all this kind of stuff. And see, what happens is that as youngsters, you have so many folks trying to be a certain way and live a certain perception. And what it is not black culture. That has been disproven. What it is American culture. American culture says that you go after the gangster, the slick guy, the main character in the movie. You don't go after the sidekick who's the guy typing on the computer in Mission Impossible while Tom Cruise does all the ass kicking and having fun. You go for Tom Cruise. So that's American culture. That's nobody else's culture though. Everybody else's culture, they want their man to have it here, they want their man to have it here, and they want their man to have it in their heart. And so when you look at African peoples, you look at Asians, you look at Jewish people, they may have American citizenship, but they're not marrying the American way. The American way is making up this myth, this false reality, which is the same reality that they make up about us, and then selling it back to us, and we're buying it. And then we have too many of our men being mediocre because we don't have our women holding them up to their standard. So just to recap, finances, right? Reality versus perception, which is purely that women want something that just isn't there. You know, they have high standards. A lot of times it's not there. And number three, women helping us get people to actually meet those standards. We need women to understand their power. So that's why we're not getting married at the same rate as other people in this country, and that's also why we're getting divorces at a higher rate than other people in this country. If we want to have wealth, if we want to have power, and we want to have freedom, we're going to have to get married. We're going to have to keep our families together, and we're going to have to build